Good morning, how are we doing today? My name is James Sweeney, aka SplitSuit. Welcome back to another video. And today we're going to answer a question sent in by Jamie, and Jamie asked the following. The casino I play at that runs 1-2 only allows a 50 big blind starting stack. It's common to see $15 raises pre-flop. Could you run through how you'd alter your game to allow for the reduced stack size? So before we get into the strategic adjustments I would make in a game like this, the first thing I ask myself is, do I want to play this format in the first place? This is not particularly great structure by any stretch of the imagination, and if the rake is really bad, say more than $5, or if they take a drop before the flop, and yes, some rooms do actually do this, even in formats this bad, I would probably actively avoid this, but if you do decide to play it, there are definitely some things you can be doing, but always ask yourself, are there other options available? I know in some places you just don't really have a card room very close, but in others, especially if you have options, at least consider what else is available and which is going to offer you the best return on your time. But if you do decide to play this, there are some strategic things you definitely want to be looking for. Now, strategically speaking in this game, most of your decision making is going to be pre-flop and on the flop in small SPRs. Because if you think about it, let's just say someone opens to 15, you call, you go heads up to it, right? Roughly $30 in the middle, roughly $90 back, you're talking about a 3 SPR pot, which is extremely simple when you have top pair plus, stack it off. When you have draws, typically stack them off. And when you have nothing, well, typically be a little bit more selective. But these are very, very simple spots, and they're very, very mathy if you really think about it. Similar to when you're playing smaller effective stacks in tournaments, things get very, very mathematical very quickly. And because you're not talking about spots where you're going to have a lot of turn or river flexibility, things are very, very simple and basic. Most of your decision making is going to be pre-flop and flop oriented, which means choosing the right hands pre-flop, which means knowing how to play those small SPR pots, and things become much, much easier. So if you're going to play this format, again, if you're going to play in situations where you know you're going to have a lot of small SPRs, then make sure this is where you focus your study time. But if you're playing deeper games, be it games where you typically have 100, 200, 300 big blind stack depth, then making sure that you're very, very strong on turns and rivers where you can generate huge, huge edges is going to be more beneficial. In this game though, pre-flop and flop focus is going to be it for sure. It's going to pay off huge at the end of the day. Now, very related to this point is that you want to be very selective and wary pre-flop when it comes to set mines, suited connectors, and suited gappers, right? These kind of implied odd hands are very common to call with pre-flop when you're talking about deeper stack depth because you have more ability to be able to maximize the times you do hit, and also you're going to have more room to be able to actualize draws on turns and rivers when you have the deeper stacks. But in this more shallow format, you definitely do not have that. So you're not going to be able to play as many of these hands pre-flop, especially when it comes to calling with them. Maybe you can find spots to raise with them, but when it comes to calling that $15 raise pre-flop, you want to be very, very selective. Now, of course, there is a big difference between someone raises, there's a bunch of calls, and you're in the big blind closing action, and you decide to call, versus a situation where someone in early position opens, and you're next to act with a suited connector. In that kind of situation, I'm typically folding, but this is mostly because you're getting a pretty bad multiplier, and you're not really going to have full options to be able to maximize and actualize your hand. So be very, very selective with these things. Don't think you're going to be able to play all of them. You just simply won't. The next thing to keep in mind are your open raises, right? Both in terms of the size and also the hands you decide to actually raise with. So first and foremost, when it comes to the raise, I know a lot of people say, well, the table is opening for 15, so I guess I have to open for 15 too. And I would say pump the brakes on that thought process. You may actually be able to raise smaller, maybe a more normal 10 or 12 versus going to 15. I know even that's a little bit large compared to say online, but there are plenty of situations where table standard might be a little bit larger and you say, no, I'm going to try tweaking it down. And you may actually be shocked how often the table says, wait, $10 is an option, $12 is an option, and all of a sudden they start using that too. Remember, live poker is very, very monkey see, monkey do, so keep that in mind. So it's not that you have to open 15. You could say, you know what, I'm going to try opening to $10, see what happens, and see if I can change the table. Sometimes you definitely can. As for the actual hands you do decide to open raise with, there are of course a lot of different factors here based upon position, how likely people are to 3-bet behind you, how likely people are to do certain things post-flop. So keep that kind of stuff in mind, how multi-way it's likely to go, all that kind of fun stuff. in general, you're probably going to be more selective here, unless you think that you can raise and get a bunch of folds, which probably isn't happening in this kind of format, but keep it in mind, sometimes you will find those kind of tables that you can open raise a lot of hands here, but more often than not, you're probably going to have to be pretty selective, especially if these pots tend to go multi-way a large chunk of the time, just because again, you're going to find yourself in those small to medium SPR pots, and you're not going to be able to have much flexibility for bluff c-bets, barrels, all that kind of fun stuff. So unfortunately, this is kind of the game where more often than not, tight is going to be right. And again, this kind of factors back to that original question of, is this the right format for me? Is this the best place for me to maximize my edge? Probably not. Again, it's not to say that it can't be profitable, but it may not necessarily be optimal for you and your edges, so keep that in mind. But just in general pre-flop, again, think about the open raise size. Do you have to go to 15? And when you're choosing your raise range, thinking about which hands are going to perform best and exactly how wide you think you can go. Sometimes very wide, sometimes probably a little bit tighter. And then the final major strategic area where I would definitely spend some time and effort is your 3-betting and your squeezing. There can be a lot of win rate potential here for players who are willing to put in just a little bit of extra work off table. So think about how many players are willing to put in the $15 open but aren't necessarily willing to call the all-in even though it's only for another 85 bucks. This kind of spot can happen all the time. You can find some really nice outright profit where they open too wide, give action to the 3-bet far too tight, and they're folding too much, giving you a nice situation where you can be doing this with lots of different starting hands. So be on the lookout for this. It does take some time and effort off table to know your numbers, to understand what original ranges look like, what do they open raise with, and what are they likely to continue with, and is there a big gap between those two numbers? The bigger the gap, the more often you want to be doing this because there's more outright potential available. So the big tip that I would give here is try not to get cutesy with your raise sizing, right? If they go to 15, I wouldn't really be going to a $50 3-bet. I'm more likely just going to be shoving it myself and applying maximum pressure, removing an option of theirs. I don't really want to go to 50 and all of a sudden they shove. I'm getting a really good price on the comeback and now all of a sudden I have to make really weird calls, right? If I could have just shoved it instead of going to 50 and all of a sudden maybe applied a little bit of extra pressure, found a couple of extra folds pre-flop, that can be really, really nice. And again, this shows up in 3-bets. This also shows up in squeezes. So when you're talking about squeezing, there's going to be multiple players to think about, multiple ranges to think about. But again, there could be some really nice potential when say there's a $15 open, a call, and you're risking $100 on your shove to pick up 30 and change, well, again, that can be really, really nice. So keep in mind that this definitely requires some hand reading, this definitely requires some basic math and studying this stuff off table, and it requires some gusto to put some chips in play, but for the players that are willing to look for these spots, study these spots, and then take these spots when you find them, there is some serious win rate potential out there. Now, again, overall in this kind of game and dynamic, you're probably going to end up finding yourself tightening up, especially if the game is very, very loose and splashy. But if this is the kind of game where it is shallow, but people tend to be folding too much, there can be some really nice spots for you to apply tons of aggression, be them with steals, be them with raises, be them with 3-bet shoves. There are definitely spots available, so don't think that this is a totally dud game, but again, it may not be the best game to maximize your overall win rate and time at the table. So like I've mentioned a couple different times in this video, this kind of game format and structure is very, very mathematical. So you have to do some off-table study with the math, and it's not going to take too long, honestly. If you put in maybe 30 minutes a day for a couple of weeks, you'd be much better off in these kind of games, and way more so than your opponents who are likely not putting in anywhere near this kind of study. And to make your life a little bit easier, I did put together all of my math spreadsheets for you to make your life a billion times easier when it comes to studying this stuff. So you can download all of that at splitsuit.com/sheets. It is a name your own price download, so honestly, if you want to pay $0, no problem at all. But if you do decide to ship in any amount of chips, there is a nice bonus in it for you, and trust me, this is going to save you a lot of time, especially when it comes to studying the 3-bets, the squeezes, the all-in pre-flops, and even just basic c-bet scenarios. And even if you want to go a step further and say, okay, well, how does this change if, say, I go to $10 versus opening to 15 bucks like everyone else? All that stuff can be studied with these spreadsheets. So again, you can download them at splitsuit.com/sheets. And if you do decide to throw in any amount of chips, trust me, there's something you're definitely going to like in there, so get to it today. And that is going to wrap it up for this video. Jamie, thank you so much for this question. Hopefully it helps. And if you're playing in this kind of game, I wish you the best of luck. There's definitely going to be a lot of variance, but if you put in the time and effort off table, trust me, it will go a long way towards helping your win rate, and hopefully, ideally, helping you win some money and then get the heck out of this format and structure as quickly as humanly possible. So same as always, if you have any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to leave them down below. And again, please make sure to like and subscribe, hit the little bell notification so you get a heads up the next time I add a new video. And if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, as always, good luck out there and happy grinding. Now, very related to this point is that you want to be very selective pre-flop, very wary of things like pocket pairs with